Michelle, I want to hear how you approach the same project. So if I've got this right, it's at 20,000 words, any time in history, anything you want to do, but it's girl and her horse. Can you come back and say, okay, well, I want to do an alternate history of the Donner Party, and just when they're getting ready to eat each other, this girl shows up with her horse and says, nope, my horse is willing to sacrifice itself. It's going to be okay. Or are there some limitations? I'm available. Should anyone be listening, I'm happy to write this story for your American.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an awesome but very, very different series. You could pitch,
zombie American horse,
American horse horror tales, maybe, or horror horse tales. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the limitations weren't so much more than what you've said, other than, they didn't really want posh, horse dressage stories. They wanted it to be a little bit more down to earth. They particularly wanted things that were, like just different stories than I think what you would think of as a traditional girl horse story of that kind of writing. But for me, I'm not exactly sure why I ended up thinking about the Dust Bowl. For some reason, I think I was just walking around my house. I wanted it to be historical. I knew that. And my eyes landed on my old copy of The Grapes of Wrath. And it was a story that I hadn't really read since high school or college, but it really stuck with me all of that time, particularly because it was a time in history that I feel like isn't written about a lot, especially not for children. And it was just a very evocative environment. And, I just came up with this idea about a girl, Ginny, and her horse, and living as farmers in Oklahoma in the same kind of environment during the same time period as The Grapes of Wrath. And knowing that these books would be written in first person, I thought, well, it would certainly be a challenge to write this book and have some of that dialect in there, but only enough so that it would still be very, very clear to the reader. Because, you do too much dialect and then it becomes a little bit difficult for a middle grade reader to comprehend. And also, how do you write about the Great Depression and have it be fun?
So 20,000 words, while you also have to do a full plot about a girl and her horse.
Yeah. I mean, it's reasonable, right? I like a challenge, I guess. But I just got sort of really into this idea once I had thought of it. And also one of our editors, I think this was partly it, that one of the editors said specifically that he was from Oklahoma. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting detail to include about yourself. I don't know anybody from Oklahoma. And so that it all sort of unfolded. And it was really, I started doing the research. I watched a lot of Ken Burns documentaries. He has an entire 6-hour documentary just about the Dust Bowl, which is unbelievable to watch. I mean, it's crazy to think that this happened in this country, within our grandparents' time. And I mean, it's unbelievable what these people went through. And so, as soon as I had started all the research and started thinking about the development of the story was when the pandemic began. And so suddenly I had made this decision before the pandemic began. And so I was working on it, and then this whole thing descended on all of us. And it was just suddenly really poignant to be learning about this other time in our country's history where it was just an unbelievable crisis. Not just the Dust Bowl, but of course the Great Depression and everything that came with it. And suddenly I'm writing this book in the midst of this unprecedented crisis, and of people just losing their jobs and being afraid and having to come together and think like, how are we going to deal with this? And, you know, learning about that time and how truly horrendous it was, the things that they went through, and to know what they did to not only survive it, but to revolutionize, you know, in the case of the Dust Bowl, farming, to make that part of the country just the most fruitful, prolific place as it is today. And I mean, and people all had to work together to make that happen. And it took a long time, and it took a lot of sacrifice, and it was just inspiring. And it was something that I didn't even realize how much I needed going through that time myself, you know, and just seeing everything unfolding around me. And so it took on another level of meaning because of what happened. And, you know, ultimately the story is about hope. And I thought to myself as I was coming up with the plot, I was like, how am I going to make this have a happy ending? Because it's, you know, the book takes place in a very short amount of time. It's in 1936. They don't get out of this until a couple years later, where things really start to turn around, get better for those farmers. So I was like, man, you know, what am I going to do? I don't want to, it has to, I wanted it to be as historically accurate as I could make it. And so, you know, maybe this is a little spoilery, but like what ultimately it became was that, you know, at the end, it's not that everything is better. It's not that everything is fixed. It's that there's this greater understanding and appreciation of the people within her family, and just this little tidbit of hope that here's something that we can all start to do to start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, it wasn't an easy fix, and I mean, none of it was, but it was just that, you know, that idea that like, hey, we're all in this together, and, you know, here's something that we can all do to start to get out of this. And that sometimes that little bit is all you need to keep going. You know, it's like the guy on the side of a cliff. I don't know if you've seen that movie about the guy who free climbed that gigantic.
Yes. Oh, that was so good. Yeah.
It was unbelievable, you know, but like I remember watching him scale this like literal just wall. And I mean, you'd see he'd like crook his finger over barely this tiny crack, and that would be enough to lift himself up to the next handhold. And I mean, it's very symbolic to me of just like how much people need to go on. It's not a lot, you know, you don't have to give people everything to fix their problems, but you just need a little bit, just a little bit, and you can keep going. And so it was a really great experience, especially for, you know, the book that's the first book with my name on it. It was just very meaningful. So, yeah.